I'm Maryn.
And I'm Christie.
And you're listening to Hung, a podcast where we talk about true crime from the court of law to the court of public opinion.
Welcome back. We are continuing with our series on Colin Griffith.
Boo. Just kidding.
Boo.
just kidding. Yay.
Oh, gosh. Oh, that makes me feel really excited about today. So today is really heavy on law enforcement interaction. The big one is a juvenile detective.
So we've got some of the experts that were there witnessing the scene of the crime, and then the detective who was there to witness the crime that was their relationship, I think.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
All leading up to that. And what, she was their detective, I think, for a year?
Correct.
Like, kind of on the case of them.
Right. She was over their case, trying to help them be successful. Yeah. So we'll just start in with our witnesses. We have a couple more forensics witnesses. So one of them does say that she noticed the AirPod stuff too, and that it looked like maybe a fight started outside the house and continued into the house. Says that the wound that she saw on the victim's neck was consistent with someone being attacked and stabbed. She also says she sees him for the first time at 11 p.m. on the evening of the incident, which the 911 call was at 6:14 in the evening.
Okay.
So this is hours later. And she says that the defendant was emotionless, which she said didn't change during the time that she interacted with him. She was the one that took pictures of him, took fingernail clippings of him and stuff like that. This CSI tech says that there was blood on his right ear, the right arm of his glasses, under his fingernails, and on his shoes and shorts. And she was not there when fire and rescue washed the blood off his forearms and hands. She took pictures of his clothing after it was collected, and she says that there were apparent marks noted on the defendant's arms that looked fresh.
Okay.
So seems like maybe that could be indicative of some type of fighting going on. She didn't really describe what the fresh marks looked like on the arms. That kind of is consistent with the Nancy neighbor that says looked like he'd been in a scuffle to her.
Right.
We know that he moved the knife.
Sure.
So we know he would have blood on him just from that alone. We know that he performed CPR on her.
And tried to stop bleeding.
We know his arms and hands were covered in blood, you know, that he was kneeling at her head, which there was a lot of blood around her head. So shoes, shorts, under his fingernails, that all makes sense. He is right-handed, so she does point out if he were to reach up and adjust his glasses, which,
that's what I was thinking,
you know,
as well.
You're performing CPR, your head's down, you're sweating. That makes sense that you would touch. And also that's right by your ear. So he could easily have touched both the arm of his glasses and his ear in the process of adjusting his glasses. They didn't say it was blood spatter across his face. If it was just on his ear and his glasses and it was from spatter, he would likely have blood other places too, not just that localized. And then the defense attorney also does ask specifically about any marks on his torso. She does say that there was a mark noted to the defendant's torso consistent with the cut in the shirt.
Interesting.
Yeah. So, okay. I mean, that does seem like, okay, well, she could have been swiping at him with a knife, and he could have been struggling with her over this knife. And we know there's something on the back of the shirt, but she doesn't ask anything about that. Like, is there some sort of wound on the back? So maybe that was an earlier, you know,
and
something
like
that happened before or not.
Back
we
there
don't know.
compared to like a slash.
Yeah.
You know.
Right.
Could have been there. Flash in the middle is kind of a weird thing to like
and
keep
right by your
that
by your belly. You know, it's like that's a kind of a weird spot too. Yeah, and then the other CSI tech that we hear from, forensics person, she goes to the morgue for when they're doing the autopsy and takes pictures and stuff there. And she also collects blood samples, fingerprints, hair samples, swabbings, you know, all of that kind of stuff. She does mention that she has scrapes and injuries to her entire body.
Okay, wow.
prominent bruising on her left wrist and forearm, bruising on her right arm and hands, and injuries to her legs and shins. And then during cross-examination, it comes out that the bruises are different colors, which could indicate that some of them were older and some were newer. And we don't know exactly how she got them. And that's kind of it. But that is kind of the first, like, ooh, okay. She does seem like maybe she had some significant signs of maybe there was a drawn out physical fight that was taking place, where maybe she was getting beaten up quite a bit.
Yeah.
And maybe she had cause to pull a knife on somebody who was beating her up.
Yeah, definitely. Well,
if she did that, right.
Right. And if you're comparing, besides the obvious wound, right, if you're comparing the amount of physical wounds on both of them, it seems that she has more physical wounds on her than he does.
Than what we're hearing about him.
Right.
Yeah.
And you would think that if he was covered in tons of severe wounds, that probably would want to mention that, especially defense.
Yeah, if he had clear bruising and stuff all over his shins or his arms, that they would have brought that out, and they didn't. They just brought out the slash on the abdomen, and we already knew
the one that
they
looks good
had
for them is,
Yeah.
Well, just because that's their job, right? They're like, well, we're going to want to point out because this looks,
for sure,
the same way that the state is not going to point out his injuries because it doesn't look good for them. So
right. So the fact that they didn't,
it's very interesting. It's like okay, that makes you think one thing. Oh, wait, I don't know. Maybe now that makes you think another way. Like,
yeah, definitely. Now, this is one that I just got kind of confused because they jump back in time. So they jump back to September of the prior year, September of 2023.
Okay.
And they call in this sheriff's deputy who was called out to the crisis stabilization unit. And basically that's a place, if someone's Baker acted, which I learned Baker acting is if you are shown to be a threat to yourself or others, they can put you into some sort of unit. So he gets called out to oversee the release of a potentially violent patient.
Okay.
So he shows up, and as soon as Colin walks out of the building, he walks directly to the sheriff's vehicle, or him. I don't know if he was in or out of the vehicle, but he says, I need to be Baker acted.
After he's just been Baker acted. So
he's like, I need to be Baker acted. And he said, well, that was weird. I've never had that happen before, that someone's actually requesting to be Baker acted. And he said that to him, Colin appeared focused. He had a goal. He wanted to be readmitted to that facility. And he kind of asks him, like, why do you need to? And he says that he's either going to go and kill himself or he's going to kill his mother. And he says he asked Colin how he planned to do that and that he gave a bunch of examples, but he doesn't remember exactly what they were. But all of them would have resulted in the death of somebody, whatever they were.
Yeah. Which, like, two sides to that. One, he's serious, or two, he knows that that's what you need to say to be Baker acted. Also, this is where he might have Colin written on his tag, is if he's been in an institution like that. I think that they want you to label your clothing.
That's true.
So that was my thought when you said, and I was like, oh, do they talk about it in here? I don't know. Do they talk about his, being institutionalized? And okay, I'll just wait till she says it, and then I'll bring it up. But
yeah, that is a good point. That hadn't really occurred to me, but you're absolutely right that is a reason that he may have had that in there.
The only reason that makes sense. That any other reason would be strange. But
true. Well, so and he was readmitted to the facility as a danger to himself or others.
That's
so
good.
That was kind of it. And he admits he wasn't involved in the original call. He has no idea why Colin was there in the first place. And clearly, Colin was trying to prevent his release from this facility. And she asked specifically if he recalled Colin saying anything about him not wanting to go home because he didn't feel safe there. And he didn't recall anything about that. So that was pretty brief testimony. But then we have another deputy that was called out in November of 2023 to a home, which was Cathy's home, for a domestic violence issue. And the deputy was still in training at the time, so he asks all the questions and such. He has his supervisor or trainer with him,
This is a year
prior,
which
makes this kind of confusing because they keep bringing up this date and then they're bringing up the date of the incident. And so it was hard for me to keep track. Like, what are they talking about? You know? He talked to Cathy and he talked to grandmother Susan, and Colin had left the residence, but then did come back to the house, and he talked to Colin after he got back to the house. His impression of Cathy's demeanor was that she was really nervous, quiet, scared, teary-eyed, and he said she did have some injuries that were photographed and documented, like kind of some swelling and redness. Cathy, to her abdomen and some abrasions on her hands. She said that Colin kneed her in the stomach and that he stepped on her hand when she tried to go for her phone. So they took pictures of that. Cathy says that the whole fight was because she wasn't happy with his behavior, and she had told him she was going to take away his Xbox and his phone or something.
Awful mother.
I know, terrible. And so he was mad about it, and he got up, kneed her in the stomach, stepped on her hand, and leaves the house.
Okay.
And the deputy says, yeah, and I talked to the grandmother and she corroborated mom's stories. So doesn't really say what grandma says, just says that grandma's statement agreed with the mom's statement, and they didn't notice any sort of bruising on Colin. So they put him in the police car and he was placed under arrest for battery and taken to county jail. No charges against mom or grandma. And the deputy just gives her paperwork detailing her rights as a victim. And she tells the deputy, I don't want him to live with me anymore because I'm afraid of him. And then it goes to the defense attorney, and she brings out that it was actually Colin who called 911, not the mom. So they had this altercation. He leaves the house, gets out of there, and he calls the cops.
Okay.
Colin tells this witness that his mom had punched him and that he threw her off of him. She also brings out that grandma's testimony didn't actually corroborate Cathy's. She says that the fight happened. She stepped out of the room to get her phone, and when she came back in, they were on the floor.
Okay.
So she can't say whether or not Cathy hit Colin or how they got to the floor. So it is a little bit misleading to say that the testimony corroborated Cathy's, because some parts of it did corroborate, but there were blank parts that nobody could corroborate.
Right.
But he didn't notice any injuries on him, so he's like, well, looks like her story is right, so we're going with that. And the defense attorney asks, so did you run their records to find out about any history or whatever? And he says, yeah, we ran Colin's history and we didn't find any arrests or anything on there. And she says, but you found out that Cathy had some domestic violence charges? Oh, no, we didn't run her records because she was the victim.
Right.
Which, like, if you have two conflicting statements,
totally,
you should treat them both as aggressors.
Totally.
Because you really don't know what happened in the situation. But they didn't do that. So the defense attorney goes through all of these things, and it's pretty alarming as you hear the list of things that she has been charged with. So she was arrested for stabbing her prior husband.
Oh, wow.
She was alleged to have burned her husband with a heat lamp in that same incident.
Wow.
She was shown on video driving her car into her then husband and pinning him to the house in front of their children, including Colin.
Okay.
Are you aware that Cathy had threatened to kill multiple members of her then ex-husband's girlfriend's family, and that she was contacted by law enforcement while she was on her way to their home to carry out such act?
Wow.
Oh, no, I wasn't aware of that. Are you aware that she's pulled a gun on Colin and threatened him? Nope, didn't know that either. Did you know that she'd pulled a gun and threatened to kill her mother's husband in the past? No, he didn't know that either. Would knowing any of that have changed his assessment of the situation? And he says, nah, it wouldn't have made any difference because this was a different situation. And to me, that it should have changed his assessment of the situation. And the fact that he's saying no is basically just saying, well, my assessment must have been right. So I can't admit that, that would have made a difference if I had known that stuff, because that makes me look bad.
Yeah. I agree with you.
So, yeah, that was pretty shocking to me. Hearing that list of stuff that she'd done, wow, she has a pretty violent history of
Totally.
attacks against family members. So that does kind of color the picture a little bit for me. And then the state gets back up and basically says, do victims of domestic violence, don't they often go back to their abusers? Oh, yeah, they do. And sometimes those victims end up getting killed by their abuser. So kind of saying just because Cathy wanted Colin back,
Okay.
did it mean that she wasn't a victim
Sure.
of domestic violence? Which, okay. And that Colin had said when she got upset and when mom said she was going to take this stuff up and he's like, okay, let's do this, that he was acting aggressively, so he felt like he was the aggressor, which he may have been.
Yeah.
So,
Well, my understanding is he's saying that she punched him and so he reacted in self-defense. I mean, you can get away with self-defense for some things, but if somebody slapped you and you shot them, you could
Right.
really say oh, well, I was defending myself. I don't know what was going to happen. I'm like, okay, well, as a flight attendant, when we talk about threat levels and defending yourself, you are allowed to combat or defend with the same level of force used against you.
yeah, that does make sense. And there's no question that they're showing that this is a volatile relationship. And I don't think that Colin is innocent in this
Right.
either.
Yeah, I mean, there's no question about the toxic nature
Yeah.
of their relationship.
Yeah, for sure. So I don't think there's any way, whether she punched him or not, he's not blameless, right? He reacted in a very
It would be
aggressive
interesting
way.
to see, her ex-husband, what domestic charges does he have?
Yeah, well, and it's also clear that Colin grew up around violence in his
Yes,
home.
definitely.
And so watching people respond violently, he's been taught to respond the way that he has. That doesn't excuse his behavior or whatever, but it's certainly understandable that he has learned how to respond in ways that's dysfunctional.
Yeah, 100%.
So then we jump back to September of 2023. This deputy comes out because they're trying to release him because mom is insisting she's trying to get him out.
Sure.
And the staff didn't feel like he was safe to be released. And he's stating he doesn't want to go home with his mother. And so he made statements about harming his mother and his grandmother and said, this is a direct quote by this witness, he'd done it before and he would do it again. And he described that he would either push them out of a car, stab them, or shoot them.
That's pretty specific.
I mean, it covers pretty much all the ways.
Yeah.
And then the prosecutor says, so when he said he'd done it before and he could do it again, was he specifically referencing that he had killed before and he could kill again? And she says yes. Yeah. So thinking back to Oklahoma and what? What's happening here? Are you going to tell us anything more? No.
Yeah, I don't know.
So the defense attorney brings out that Colin had stated multiple times to her that he did not feel safe going home. And that the deputy had been there for hours with Colin questioning him, and he had not met the criteria for being Baker acted. And I guess she was saying, well, no, we can't Baker act you. And finally he said, quote, the magic words, and he was quickly Baker acted. So she kind of points out, well, he went this whole time, all these hours, not saying I'm going to stab them or push them out of a car or shoot them. But you're not listening to him that he doesn't feel safe at home. You're saying
Totally.
he's not appropriate to go back in. So he finally does say that, and immediately he gets Baker acted. So, is it really that he's intending on doing that? Or is he recognizing that this is the only thing that's going to get them to listen to me? So the defense attorney, the witness was kind of like, oh, well, maybe not really realizing, oh, okay, actually, maybe that makes sense. She's a bit like, oh, I don't know what you mean. I don't know what you're referring to. And she said, well, once he said he would hurt his mom or his grandma, you immediately put him back in the facility. And she says, absolutely, that was a homicidal statement. Okay. Yeah, well, his intention from the beginning was to stay.
Right.
So no one would listen to him. And then he finally makes this statement and he gets put back in like he wanted.
Yeah, I don't know. It's like if you take incidents totally by themselves, it's one thing. But then when you put them with the whole picture, it's another thing. Because you're like, well, it's fine. Then maybe said that and you could brush that to the side. But then it actually happens later. And I don't know. Is that enough to say premeditation? Maybe not. Maybe at the time it was, I don't know. I just don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's clear that he has made multiple statements to people. We've heard it. Is it the same as what the prosecution, the state is claiming? I don't see that yet in what he's saying. So far, everyone has agreed that it was always an if-then type of statement. But in this case, the state does come up and say, well, did he make an if-then statement? But in this case, it was just a statement saying, I'll kill my mom, not as a reaction to anything. But you also have the situation where you can see that he's realizing he has to make a certain kind of statement in order to get put back in the facility. And he doesn't want to go home. So
yeah. I mean, a lot of elements to it, which could mean something, could not mean something. So,
yeah. The next witness is one of the juvenile detectives that started working with the family in September of 2023. And she got to know the family very, very well.
Is this the same person the notification was from?
Lacey. So Detective Lacey Zanoniani. So it's not a surprise that it was Detective Lacey in the phone because Detective Zanoniani is a bit of a mouthful.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense.
Yeah. So her whole job was to be available to them. And she says she often spoke to them daily and sometimes multiple times in a day. So she was very actively involved with this family. And on the day that Cathy died, Mom had called and texted the detective, and the detective had spoken on the phone with Cathy. And later she called and texted, and Cathy didn't answer. And we know that it was during that time that she was at Susan's house.
Right.
She does say that Colin made several comments to her about the harm that he wanted to do to his mom. And he said that if he was returned home with his mom, he wouldn't be able to control what happened or that he would harm her, and that those comments were made on multiple occasions. And the common theme kind of was he would get mad when his mom would try and discipline him. And that Detective Lacey had been trying to work with Cathy on how to respond appropriately, what types of consequences were appropriate, how to enforce those consequences, things like that. And she said that Cathy would act like she was receptive, but then she would often go against what was being discussed, and she would give in and cater to Colin's desires, and she felt like at times she was too soft with Colin. So she did say Cathy loved Colin and wanted him to be around her, that Cathy was aware that Colin had made threats on her life, and basically, I'll accept that if that means I get some more time with him before that.
Okay.
Not me. Sorry.
Yeah.
I don't know.
That's a statement. That's, I don't know.
I would say, I think he needs help. I'm not, why don't we get him some help? And just instead of saying, well, yeah, he might kill me someday, but I just want to be with him as long as I can.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, being with him as long as you can might include being away from him for a little bit while he gets some help to have more time down the road. Also, it seems kind of the saintly way you might talk about somebody after they've died.
True.
That you're like, did they really say that?
Right.
Did they really say, oh, I don't care as long as I get to spend some time with him, even if he kills me? I'm like, did you really say that?
I can accept that. I can accept that I'm going to die at his hands. It's very consistent with the way that the prosecutor wants to have a very grandiose kind of scene. The way he's describing things, it does fit with that, the way he wants to tell the story. And it may even be true, but seems a little bit dysfunctional,
Totally.
which we know there is some serious dysfunction there. So When the defense cross-examines Detective Lacey, she brings up Cathy's troubled past with the
Domestic
law.
violence.
Yeah. And she says, that she knew of instances of Cathy being violent towards family members and that most of those were committed in front of her children. She did have her children taken away from her on multiple occasions as a result of her behavior. And one of those instances was her being arrested for stabbing her husband in front of Colin. And she had been arrested and he had been taken away from her as a result of that. Then they talk about the car pinning episode and that she's sitting in the car actively. They're trying to get her to back up the car and release him. She's not doing it. The older son, he comes out with a baseball bat. And he's trying to bash in the windows to get into the car to get
Scary.
her to. So kind of wild, right?
Yeah.
A wild type of situation. And, stated that the county sheriff's office responded a lot to Cathy's house. And also talked about there were multiple instances where Cathy calls to report incidents that were then proven to be false.
Okay.
So she calls and says that her husband's girlfriend had tried to strangle her and that she had video proof. And then the video shows, sorry, I don't want to laugh about it, that it's actually Cathy trying to strangle herself. Like she's trying to make it look like it's somebody else, but it was actually, they determined that it was her.
This is like a more macabre version of like, I've seen videos of, an example is Justin Bieber's wife, Hailey Bieber. She's constantly under allegations that her husband actually doesn't like her that much.
Oh.
And she posted a video one time of like, that looked like he was like taking a video of her and she's just kind of like, stop, whatever. And you can see in the reflection on her eyeball that she is the one holding the phone. So it's like
don't do that. Don't do that when you're trying to make it seem like you're in one situation, but you're really not. So yeah,
that's pretty comedic.
Yeah, it is a little bit.
Like, how do you make that look realistic? I don't know. Because it's going to be the wrong way. I don't know.
It's like with hands or with some other thing. I don't really know. But so Detective Lacey did admit.
Just imagining, I have video proof, and they're like, go to show them, and they're like watching the video and then looking at her like, Cathy. I'm sorry, but we know that that's you. Like, no. Oh, gosh.
It's sad. Oh, my gosh. Yeah. So she does say that Cathy definitely, it was like my way or the highway type of attitude, and that Cathy knew Colin didn't want to live there and that he didn't feel safe there, but Cathy still wanted him to live there anyway, and that the Department of Child and Family Services, they had evaluated the situation and they had determined to place him back in the home. I mean, she kind of said, well, we did everything we could to, kind of talking around the situation and trying to support the organization. But then she did ultimately admit that, if it were up to me, I would not have had them continue to live together. But it wasn't up to me. And so I just was doing my best to try and support them in the decision that was made outside of my control.
He could have lived with his grandma. He could have been, emancipated? Like, could have been living on his own as
True.
True. So
that's like a good point. Obviously, it's easy to look back and say, ooh, we should have done something else. But it's, I don't know. I mean, to me, it does seem like he was telling people over and over.
If the
people
kid
just
is
weren't
saying,
listening.
I don't want to live with them, that should be it, honestly. It'd be like, okay, well, let's figure something out. And if nothing's really going on, at some point the kid's probably going to be like, I changed my mind, I want to go back. Like, I actually do want to live with my mom. And if something is going on, then good. They probably needed to be away. And 17 years old, you probably know. I don't know.
Yeah. So Detective Lacey says that Cathy made multiple suicide attempts in that little over a year period that she was working with them. So another sign of her just being emotionally unstable and a bit unpredictable in some of her behaviors. And then Colin did tell Detective Lacey that his mom had pulled a gun on him and threatened to shoot him and then herself. But Cathy denied having a gun, and there was no way for them to prove one way or the other whether she did or not. And then they did find out a few months later that she had actually lied to authorities and she did have a gun in the house. And she convinced everyone that I didn't do that. He's just mad at me. And so he made up this story. And then per the defense attorney questioning this witness, she says that Cathy had later admitted to her mom that she had pulled a gun on Colin. So Detective Lacey said she wasn't aware of that aspect of it. But then she also brings out that when Colin was in the Baker Act facilities, that Cathy was uncooperative with efforts to make sure that he was safe. Like, you have to sign paperwork saying that providers can communicate with each other to coordinate Colin's care. She wouldn't sign that paperwork. They wanted to try different medications with him. She refused to allow them to give him any medication. He was only 16 at the time, so he really had no say in it. And she was so desperate to get him back home that she hired an attorney to get him released from the facility against medical advice instead of...
Well, it's just like, she had him Baker acted, probably.
Well, I think he was Baker acted because, like, the police have to, if they hear something, you know, so if they had responded to some situation and he says that, then they have to put him in the facility, you know, but usually they'll hold him for like 72 hours. But she's trying to immediately get him back out before the 72-hour period, is refusing to let them try and talk about what might help him, medications to try and stuff. She's just like, no, I just want him back out, get him out. And then
pretty short-sighted.
And then they actually recommend and do send him to a residential facility when he's 16. And it's supposed to be like a 60 to 90 day program. And mom checks him out after 3 days. Against medical advice and everyone's advice. Right? So everyone's like, let him stay in there. Let them work with him. Let them try and help him. She refuses. She wants him home with her. And to me, that's just like, hey, people are trying to help them. They're trying to say, and she's just not willing to do any of the things that are recommended that she should do to help him, to help her. So it's really unfortunate. And so we have that one incident that we've heard about of him kneeing his mom in the stomach and leaving the house and whatever. The day before that, on November 11th, mom had kicked him out of the house, and then mom called and reported him as a runaway.
Okay.
Yeah, and Colin had actually gone to his grandma's house. Detective Rentis and Detective Lacey both recommended that Colin stay with his grandma for a few days and let things calm down. And she insisted that he come home, and then this altercation occurred where the police were called because she was kneed in the stomach.
Right.
And we're going to see a repeat of that. That's kind of the same situation that they're found in. Of course, this is terrible, and whether it was accident or intentional, you know.
Totally.
Yeah, horrible situation. But it does match a lot of that same situation that had happened a year prior. So the defense attorney asks about, oh, well, did you know about Cathy beating Colin with a belt in front of his grandmother? And she says, I don't know anything about that. And she said, well, Cathy told her mom that Rentis had told her it was fine, that she could beat him with a belt and that was okay.
Okay.
And Detective Lacey's like, well, he would never have said that. So they had put him in jail, and when they're trying to release him from jail, he wants to stay in jail. So it's kind of the same thing. They do end up forcing him to get in the car with his mom and to go home. And then later on that day, they're like, maybe we shouldn't have done that.
Maybe.
So they called the sheriff's department and asked if they would go do a wellness check at their house. And so they turn up, and when they get to the house, Cathy has Colin holding weights up over his head and marching in place. And she says that she's had him doing that since he got back home. And she says, well, I wasn't there for that, but I did hear about it later. And then he was Baker acted again the next day. on November 14th, and Cathy OD'd that day, and she was also Baker acted on the 14th.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So just kind of this erratic behavior that sometimes she wants, throw the book at him, and then the next minute, give him back, and I want you dropping the charges.
Yeah.
So they finally do a custody agreement, a 751, they call it, and they give Grandma and Cathy joint custody.
Okay.
February 2024, Cathy calls and claims that Colin had attacked and battered her again. That's when they find the gun in the home. And then they look at the ring video and determine that he hadn't beaten her up. It was a false claim that she had made against him. So she agrees to turn over the gun. So she does get rid of the gun, which that's good. The Department of Child and Family Services wants Colin to stay with Grandma for a while, and she wouldn't allow it. So they bring up that she made up false allegations on numerous occasions. She says, yeah, Cathy was manipulative. Colin was also manipulative.
Sure.
And
You learned it from somebody.
And Colin said he'd rather be in jail or a psych facility or in foster care than be with his mother because he felt unsafe. They didn't get along and they didn't respect each other. How many kids are like, please put me in foster care?
Right.
No, never.
Yeah.
And she did say that all of his statements, again, if she does this to me, then I might respond in ways that would hurt her. So, yeah, she says the day before Cathy died that she had called and left messages and stuff, but the detective was away on some trip or something and she didn't have her phone with her and she didn't see those messages and stuff until later. But then she did talk to Cathy that next day of the incident, and she told Cathy, let him stay with Grandma, let him cool off. And she was going to do whatever she wanted to do. And she's like, nope, I'm going, and I'm going to report Colin as having stolen the car, even though it wasn't true. She was telling them that law enforcement said that they were going to arrest her if Colin wasn't back at her house by 10 a.m. on the 8th, which was the day of the incident. So she was kind of like, well, I'm going to get in trouble. They're going to arrest me if you're not back here because you're breaking the terms of your probation, which also wasn't true.
Right. He was with his grandma, who also had full custody. Okay.
Yeah, except she wasn't at home. She was out of town. So there is that aspect of it, that she was there, but she was arranging to head home as a result of him coming to her house. So the prosecution brings up that, like, well, you know, suicide attempts are really, they're a cry for help. So she had a gun. If she really wanted to kill herself, she could have done it.
Sure.
Which, you know, is true. She didn't want to die. She just wanted to spend more time with her son. That's what the prosecution says. And brought up that she had a hard life, that Colin's dad had impregnated her when she was a child. I guess she was 14 when she had Christopher. And then it was a number of years before she got pregnant with Colin with the same dad. But anyway, Colin didn't like doing chores, didn't like being told what to do. And sometimes, you know, kind of like, oh, doesn't it make sense he wants to be with his grandma because grandmas are nicer, they're more lenient, so it makes sense that he just wants to not have to do stuff, so he wants to stay at grandma's house.
Right. I mean, understandable. It's one of those things that, like, I don't know, you become an adult and you can look back on those things and be like, yep, that makes sense.
Yeah.
But, like, as a teenager, some of those things feel like the end of the world and you're never going to grow up and make your own choices and whatever. So
yeah. For sure. Then we have a sheriff corporal that had worked on road patrol, and she had been in that same juvenile unit where Detective Lacey and Rentis worked. And she was moving into a different job or something, but she had some knowledge of this situation with Colin because the transition was taking place kind of at the same time as this September incident where they started working with the juvenile intervention team. So when there was that incident on November 14th that Colin called Rentis, then Rentis messaged this Corporal Moore, and she came over to the house. So she showed up, and I guess the other sheriff's deputies had arrived because they got the call, but she arrived because Rentis told her what was happening, and so she went over to the house just to check things out. And she had body cam on, and there was also the camera in Jankowski's vehicle, which was the one that was supervising. Really, the whole reason that they have her come on is to get video admitted into evidence.
Because it was her body cam.
Yeah. They do show parts of the conversation that Colin was having with Rentis. He is saying that there's two different Collins. There's Colin 1 and Colin 2. And Colin 1 just wants to help people do good things in the world. He just wants to survive. And Colin 2 protects Colin 1 in situations that he can't escape from.
Okay.
And Colin 2 is the person who killed someone. But you're talking to Colin 1 right now, the one who wants to help people.
That's better than saying Colin 2 just wants to, he's violent and blah, blah, blah.
Right.
Like, you know, some people are like, oh, I have got a dark side. And he's like, well, he's not saying that. He's just saying...
He protects me if in situations I can't get out of.
Right.
Then that comes out. Now, does he really have a split personality disorder? I don't know, but I think that... basically he's getting out that normally I'm a person that's trying to help people and do good things.
Right.
But then in these situations, a different side comes out because I have to protect myself, right? And Rentis is saying, well, like, I'm just trying to figure out, like, what exactly you're scared of. And he's like, well, I'm scared of going back in there because I don't know what's going to happen. Like, what's going to happen next time? If she comes at me and I respond, what's going to happen? Like, I'm scared of that situation. And Rentis says, I think you're capable of killing your mother, but I don't think that you will.
Okay.
And he says, no, why would I? Like, I don't want to kill my mother. Then Rentis asks him do you think that Colin 1 would let you get to that point and that could happen? And he says, yeah, Colin 2 is the strongest version of me.
Okay.
Now at 3:22 a.m., he says, I don't know how I'm going to react if she does that again. And the female voice, which I'm sure is this corporal, what do you think you might do to her? And he says, if she tries to hit me again, I might hit her back really, really hard and badly. And she asks, you're going to hurt her? And he says, yeah. And they say, okay. And that's when he's Baker acted and arrested. So she does say that, yeah, every time he said anything about hurting her, it was always prefaced with, if she this, then I might respond and I might hurt her. And then we have Jankowski, the supervisor, who talks to Cathy, and we get some of his body cam footage where he asks Cathy, do you think he's capable of killing you? And she says yes. And then there's a little clip of grandma going out to the car and talking to Colin and like, why did you do that? And he says something and you can't really hear what he says. And then he kind of makes a statement implying that his mom thinks he's a psychopath. She thinks he's some kind of murderer. And he's like, I'm not that. I'm just trying to peacefully coexist and try to figure something out. And she's like, you never said that. You said that in the car, but you didn't say that in there to her, which I don't know if he's really trying to say that that's what he was stating when he was in the house, but just like, she has this view of me that is not true in his opinion. Right? I'm just trying to get by. I'm just trying to survive here until I turn 18 and I can get out of here. And she's just not letting me, you know. And then the defense gets up and was like, so Colin was in the back of the sheriff's car for more than 5 hours that night. And the deputy's like, oh, that doesn't sound right to me. And they look at the video that they'd shown during the state's testimony. And one of those was at 10:26 p.m. And then the last one was at 3:22 a.m. Oh, wow. So he was for sure. And the deputy's like, man, I'm not sure about that. That seems like an unusually long time. So weird that he's like, that doesn't sound right. But then we know it is correct.
Right.
You guys had him sitting in the car and you have hours and hours, 5 hours worth of conversation. And you share these few little clips, which what's the whole conversation? What's being said? You know. Okay, so then we have Danny Peters, who is the lead detective on the scene. So he says when he got there, Colin was already in the back of the police car, and he didn't have any contact with the defendant at that time. So kind of interesting. He doesn't even talk to him that night at all. He interviews the grandmother once when she arrives at the home, and on one other occasion, he was able
Other people are there, right?
Yeah, other
so I
people are
guess
there.
there's kind of like, I don't know, other people are working as a team, kind of, so you don't necessarily have to do everything, but...
Right. I think it's just weird to me, like the idea of it, which maybe is inaccurate. Like if I was the lead detective on there, I would want to get a feel for the defendant myself,
Yeah.
personally, but maybe that's just not the way that it works. And like you said, everyone just has different jobs because you can't do everything. Mm-hmm. But
Or if, like, people are already talking to him and say, like, am I going to butt in? And also, like...
I mean, they're talking about video games, Maryn. You can't butt into that kind of conversation. It's serious business.
Okay, because in my head, I think the last thing we were talking about was when he was in the back of the car for 5 hours.
Right.
So this is not this.
You're right, because what we just ended with was the domestic violence call from the year prior, and now we're at this one where he's in the back of the car. So it's hard to, like, you jump from he's in the back of the car in this witness's testimony, and now he's also in the back of the car.
Okay.
But it's a different event.
Okay. I got
That was good that you pointed that out.
I'm current.
Yeah.
Caught up.
So anyway, he gets there about an hour after the 911 call was made.
Okay.
And one of the things that he noticed was that it was super clean inside, outside, very organized, and there was no indication of some long, drawn out fight. They took all of the cell phones. They take the computer. Well, I'm guessing they take his laptop. I don't know. They say something about a computer, but they also say that Christopher, the older son, brings in the computer and turns it over to the police for their investigation.
Okay.
So one interesting thing, though, is they say something like, so now Christopher wasn't involved in the investigation yet. The way they said it made me feel like he was going to come into the investigation. Like there was something that was going to come out that had to do with him. Okay, so now what? What's going to happen? Like, where is he going to come in to the investigation?
Anticipating that.
Yes, because Cathy's phone was newer, they weren't able to get all the information from her phone. So they had to kind of build it backwards from Colin and Susan, grandma's phones.
Interesting.
Yeah. They were, though, able to see a lot of the photos and stuff on Cathy's phone. And one of those, they showed her with AirPods that looked like the ones that were on the ground.
Okay.
And then they also show, like, trip photos, cruises, and basically showing them, like, they're smiling. They're on these vacations together, and they're happy. And look at all this stuff that they're doing. Why isn't he happy? And then they talk about 5 Ring cameras in Cathy's house.
That's a lot.
Yeah. So there's one in every single room but the bathroom.
Interesting. If only this had happened in their own home.
I know. I thought the same thing. They did bring up that Colin was clearly aware of the cameras in the home.
Sure.
And the detective said that when he would walk into a room, he would stare directly into the camera. So, yeah. I'm like, okay, that does sound a little bit freaky. Mm-hmm. But then they bring up some other details, like Colin lived with his dad in Oklahoma. And during that time, Cathy had very limited interaction with him. And he had been with the dad for about 3 years before he then came to live with his mom. Mm-hmm. So that brings Oklahoma up again. We know he's been taken away from mom on a number of occasions. We know something happened in Oklahoma, but we don't know exactly any details about that. Mm-hmm. And then they bring up, like in Grandma's phone, there's a photograph of an attorney's business card, Jeffrey Ravkin. And he was the attorney for Colin on the domestic violence case back from 2023.
Okay.
They talk about this attorney, and then they dismiss the jury and then come back, but then we never hear from him. It's more than a half an hour that they're talking. I don't know if they talked to this attorney and did a voir dire, which they'll ask them questions to determine what they're going to say and decide if they feel like it's something that they'll let in or not.
Okay.
Which, you know, attorneys, their clients have privilege, you know, so they can't just tell anything. So it's a little curious what they would have wanted him to say. And I know I can't really extrapolate anything from that if I was a juror, but it's notable to me. So then they come back after this sidebar and they enter videos from the day before Cathy's death and the day of her death.
Okay.
Yeah. And that's the end of day 2. And then
what happens in these videos?
They didn't show any of the videos. They just entered them into evidence. And then there were some technical difficulties. They plan to call the detective back later once they figure out the technical difficulties. So, and then they come back in on day 3 and they actually start with a conference outside of the presence of the jury about something. And then when the jury is called back in, then they say, okay, there are some facts that the prosecution and defense have stipulated to, which means that the jury has to accept those as true.
Okay.
And the jury can decide how significant they find those facts, but both sides are accepting them as the truth.
Okay.
So the stipulated facts are Cathy Griffith is dead.
Yeah, okay.
We thought that was true too.
Didn't need a stipulation.
Right.
Yeah.
The other thing, though, they stipulated too is the results of the DNA analysis on Cathy's fingernail swabbings. So there was no foreign DNA on Cathy's right or left hand swabbings.
Okay. Didn't scratch anybody.
Yeah. Make of that what you will. Mm-hmm. So the medical examiner is the next witness, and his name is Dr. David Garavan. And he talks about the different injuries that she had and does say that she did have a lot of bruising. Talks about where her bruising was on her lower legs, her right shoulder, left elbow, the backs of both hands.
So for bruising, can bruises form after somebody dies, or how long before somebody dies can somebody sustain something that will actually form a bruise? Like,
right, you can tell if something happened before death
more
or
like a pooling of
after
blood than
death.
like a, I don't know.
Yeah, he does say that dating bruises is not really an exact science. There were a lot of bruises present. Yellow bruises do suggest at least 17 to 18 hours have passed, sometimes weeks. He said all the bruises looked fresh to him.
Okay.
There were some bruises on her left upper arm and elbow that he did state those happened after she died, and they could be misinterpreted as injuries. There's some other abrasions on her legs after she died, but there were a fair number of bruises and things like that. He does point out some bruises on her upper arm, her wrist, and her hand, and that would have been from some blunt force trauma, grabbing, punching, falling, kicking, and some bruises on her right arm as well. I really liked the medical examiner. I thought he did a really good job of just stating facts. He said defensive wounds tend to occur in specific locations because the body reacts in very predictable ways.
Instinctive.
But one of those things would be like holding up your forearms to block a blow. So you would expect to see bruising on your forearms if someone's trying to hit you with something. The wounds tend to be on the outside of your legs, that if you're blocking someone trying to kick you or whatever, you kind of lift your leg and it tends to hit on the outside of your
That makes sense.
lower leg. And when a knife is involved, people will often grab the blade. So,
Eek.
yeah, he's like, it's not the best move, but like
That's
people
what
instinctively
people have
do it, and that will usually leave a wound across your finger joints, you know, where they bend. So let's see, what else did he say?
Gross.
Yeah. If you put your hand up, like with your hand faced outward, it could make that cut between your thumb and forefinger. There was a slice between her thumb and forefinger on her right hand.
Okay, which is consistent with a defensive wound, right?
But he said we can't really use the term defensive injuries, but it might indicate someone was trying to defend themselves.
Sure, that's valid. Like,
Yeah.
Yep, that's a possible thing that could happen. It could also be this other thing. Yeah.
Yeah, so I appreciate that. Tell me the facts, give me the information. And then he talked about the wound in her neck. So this was interesting to me. So the blade was parallel to the floor if she was standing, let's say. So front to back through the neck.
Not in
The
like a
9
typical
to
like
3,
slasher looking thing.
so
It's
that
like
would be up
to the
and down,
side.
like 12 to 6. And this was straight across 9 to 3. And there was a square edge.
Like a butcher knife.
Yeah,
kinda.
like the square edge was at the 9 o'clock position. So I think that's towards the outside of her neck. And the sharp side was towards the middle of her neck.
Yeah, when you're saying what did you call it?
The square edge.
Square edge.
So you have that tip of the knife that's pointy, and then it's thin and sharp along the cutting edge, and it's kind of squared off along the top of the blade.
Okay, yeah.
So you can tell the direction that the blade was facing based on the wound.
Right, because it's not sharp on both sides, so...
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it travels from front to back through her neck, and it goes through the esophagus, which is your food pipe. It goes through the trachea, which is your windpipe, goes through her voice box, and exits. There's a small wound on the other side, so it does come out the other side a small bit, right? So I don't know. I didn't ever hear specifically how they say she fell that would have happened. I'm sure anything happens so fast that it can be hard to really know exactly how something happened if it was an accident, you know? But because there's all of these different tissues that are cut through, right? The state wants to, like, how much force would it take to get that through
all those
trachea, the voice box, all of this? But the medical examiner's like, well, once the tip enters, then the amount of force required is pretty minimal.
Interesting.
So, yeah. So he said
I mean, that's not like going through like bone or something.
Yeah. So he did say that the trachea is cartilaginous, so it's a little bit tougher to go through, but not that much more force would be required. He says that the vast majority of stab wounds that he has seen have been homicides. There have been some suicides, but no accidents to his knowledge. Okay, so the prosecutor keeps bringing up in this other questioning how the wound was gaping open and you could see all of the tissues and all of the structures and how horrific this wound was. And the ME brings up that there's a reason that the wound is gaping like that, and that's because of the direction of the slice. That basically things have a grain to them. Paper has a grain, wood has a grain. Well, the human body also kind of has a grain. And that if the blade had entered straight up and down that 12 to 6 position, even if it went through all the same structures, it would not have gaped open. But because it was side to side, then it was going to gape open no matter the size. That was interesting to me. Yeah. And he did say, so the human neck, obviously one of the most vulnerable parts of the human body, because you've got major arteries there. You've got some pretty important nerves there, 2 nerves, one that goes to your diaphragm so that if you cut that, you stop breathing. So, you know, pretty big deal there. So you've got the combination of bleeding and severing the nerves would lead to pretty rapid death. Yeah. So the cause of death was the stab wound to her right neck, and the manner of death, homicide. And he says he had not heard the claim that the death was due to falling on the knife.
Okay.
That it would be extraordinary, and he doesn't believe that to be the case, but he also hadn't heard it before. When the defense attorney cross-examines him, he says, yeah, he gets the police officer's interpretation of the event, and he is making his decision, we know, based off of all the information that he can get about what is known. But it's interesting that they don't tell him what the
claim is
defendant stated happened to consider how likely it was. And he hasn't heard that until he's sitting in the courtroom. That's kind of weird.
Definitely is.
Yeah, and I think it would have been important to say, how plausible is this? Is there anything that we can look at that we can determine for sure, no, that couldn't have happened that way? But that was never even really looked at because he didn't know that that was the claim that Colin was making about what had happened. So that's kind of weird to me. But I agree that it would be pretty amazing, crazy circumstance if she really did fall on the knife and it stabbed her straight across 9-3. And I mean, it is pretty wild to think that that could really have happened. Sometimes truth is stranger than fiction. Some really weird things happen that are probably never going to happen again. It's hard to imagine it, but we don't know. We weren't there. So I don't know. Okay, so he says, I can't really determine if Cathy might have attacked first with the knife. I don't know if they might have struggled over the knife. And the defense attorney brings up, like, oh, well, could she have gotten these bruises from, like, bumping into things? And he said, if that's the case, they tend to be fewer bruises and more localized. And she asks about if someone with rheumatoid arthritis would bruise more easily. And I don't know. I mean, that implies that she had rheumatoid arthritis.
Yeah, it would be a weird question otherwise.
Yeah, right. And he said, well, you know, if someone's taking steroids, then that can cause someone to bleed more easily. But he wasn't aware of that medical history. They also talked about if you grab someone, sometimes you'll see bruises that look like fingertip that you can see.
And kind of the placement of what that would be.
Right, just grabbing hard and seeing where the fingertips were on somebody's body. So there were no bruises like that noted by the ME. Okay, so toxicology report did show some drugs in Cathy's system. So there was Xanax that's used to treat anxiety, and there was amphetamine, which is a stimulant.
Okay.
So she asks about the possible side effects of Xanax, which can include racing thoughts, agitation, and risk-taking behavior, which he agreed.
Weird if that's meant to treat anxiety, but can cause racing thoughts.
I know. Sometimes they can cause the opposite response in people. So the ME says he doesn't know whether she was prescribed Xanax or not, but there was Xanax in her system. And he said that people can develop a tolerance to Xanax. So the prescriber, if she was prescribed it, might increase the dosage over time. And he also said that sometimes medications that you're taking for a long time, they can kind of store up in your tissues.
Oh, so she might not have necessarily taken it that day.
Right.
If she had been taking it regularly, it would still show up.
Yeah, so he said some medications can be stored in your fat, and they're not actually accessible to your body until death.
Oh, interesting.
And when you die, then the fat can release those stores into your system, and Xanax is one of the drugs that does do that. So he said it's possible that she has taken Xanax at some point in the past and it was released at her death, or she could have taken Xanax that day, but we can't tell for sure. And the level wasn't high enough to cause concern to the ME.
Interesting. All sorts of little tidbits you learn.
I know. That's very interesting. So they also amphetamine she was taking, which is a stimulant. Amphetamine has been around for a long time. They started using it in World War II when they found that soldiers required less food and sleep if they took a dose.
Great.
Yeah. So, you know, they could fight longer and harder and eat less food.
Sustainable.
Yeah. But they found that it can cause erratic behavior and or violence. But they said there was a very low amount in her system. So hard to know if that really is significant either. And then the prosecution got up and did a redirect and said that amphetamines can be prescribed for ADHD and narcolepsy. Again, did she have narcolepsy or not? I don't know. They just say, well, I mean, it could be used for that. Okay. And
I guess I hear amphetamines and I think methamphetamines, which I think like, oh, she was taking drugs, and maybe it's just like, hey, we just want you to know, jury, that this is a legitimate drug that is prescribed for things.
Right. It's legal meth.
It's not, it's not the same.
Right. Yeah, that was pretty much it. And I guess then that's when the ME said he didn't believe that they were contributors to her death. Now, they could have been contributors to her behavior, potentially, which I think
that's
is
not
what
his
the
expertise,
defense...
He's like, well, don't know. Not enough to determine that, but I didn't kill her.
Right. Yeah. So I think that's kind of what the defense wanted to get across, is maybe part of her erratic behavior was that she had this medication on board, but it certainly wasn't enough to kill her, just maybe enough to make her erratic and violent. I don't know. And that's the end of his testimony. I bet you're wondering what's coming up next episode.
I'm on the edge of my seat.
Yeah, you should be. You don't even know that you should be. So we have some fascinating testimony for our final trial coverage episode.
I'm intrigued.
Yeah. So we have the dueling grandparents. We've got grandpa for the state, and we have grandma for the defense. So both of them have different stories to tell, and it almost comes down to which one do you believe more?
Okay.
And how does that change your assessment of the case? So I think it's going to be the most exciting episode of all. So be sure to tune in next time.
Well, with those expectations being set, this is...
Wait, back up. Let's rewind. Say that over.
Well, with that, I'm Maryn.
And I'm Christie.
And you've been listening to Hung.